especially raw materials from Russia.
Also on the day, as the renegotiated Iran nuclear deal is put on hold, Nobel Peace Prize winner Shirin Ebadi speaks to DW about her fear that her country is being held hostage by Russia.
Iran is making a big mistake. It's one of the main differences between the Iranian government and its people. It's been a bone of contention. People are saying, why are you not serving the national interest?
To our viewers on PBS in the United States and everyone around the world, welcome. Russia's initial plan for a lightning takeover of Ukraine and its capital Kyiv may have failed, but regrouped Russian forces are now closing in on the city, with several suburbs under heavy bombardment. Kyiv's mayor Vitaly Klitschko today described his city as a fortress and said half of its residents have fled. But that doesn't mean they're safe. Since the invasion began 16 days ago, 2.5 million Ukrainians have left the country, and according to the UN, another 2 million are internally displaced. Our correspondent Matthias Böllinger has this report.
Finally boarding a bus to safety, these refugees have just come out of the fighting zone northwest of Kyiv. Daria has been on the road for hours.
We left everything there and just fled. I don't know whether we will ever be able to come back.
Irpin, a suburb northwest of Kyiv, has been one of the worst-hit places in this war. Ceasefires have been agreed and broken time and again. Just a few days ago, a family of 4 was killed near this bridge. They were shelled on their way out of the small town. This is one of the places that had been fought about for days. People have been sitting there, trapped, waiting for an opportunity to get out. Leaving behind what they could not carry with them, people have been fleeing in a hurry. Shelling can start again at any moment. Some have been walking for many kilometers before being able to cross over the bridge to reach one of the buses.
It's difficult and terrifying. The roads are destroyed. There's destroyed military equipment everywhere. Dead bodies lie around. We saw all this while walking. It's difficult for everybody, including old women. It's very frightening.
Many here have no idea where to go next. This kindergarten was closed after the war began. It's now hosting people who have fled the fighting.
Some arrive without even wearing slippers. Some come without a coat. There are some grandmothers who went out to fetch water and were evacuated because their lives were under threat.
Whole retirement homes have been evacuated. The refugees can rest here for a few days.
Everybody from our neighbourhood left. A plane flew over us. Then it suddenly turned, dropped a bomb and everything was on fire. Volunteers quickly evacuated us.
As evacuation of Irpin and other suburbs goes on, the kindergarten braces for more people to arrive in the coming days.
Let's go to Ukraine now and talk to journalist Alia Chandra, who's the editor-in-chief of Euromaidan Press, a Ukrainian news website, and as an activist took part in the 2013 Maidan protests. She joins us from the western city of Lviv. Ms. Chandra, good to see you. When Russia started this war, you were living in Kyiv, working as a journalist. Can you describe how your life has changed since February 24th?
My life has been turned upside down, like the lives of very, very many Ukrainians right now. I left my home, my city where I lived, my friends, everything, my whole life. It just fits in a suitcase right now. Overnight, I became a refugee. And I consider myself very fortunate because other people have lost their homes. They have lost their relatives. They have lost their children to Russian shelling and bombing. So I consider ourselves very fortunate that we are still alive and that we have a roof over our heads.
You relocated, but you decided not to leave Ukraine despite being pregnant. How did you reach that decision?
Like so many other people in Ukraine, I want to do what I can to help the country, and I can do that best from inside Ukraine. I want to stay with my people and to help fight off Russia in the way that I can, being a journalist and using the word. So it was like very many people in Ukraine who joined the ranks of the territorial defense, who became volunteers. I just want to be part of the collective effort to win in this war, to drive away the invaders from our land.
How challenging has your work as a journalist become? How are you reporting on what's happening in besieged places like Mariupol, like Irpin or Kherson?
It's very difficult because there is no reliable communication with those areas. Some are, they have been severed from mobile connections. So it's actually very hard to find people who are on the ground who can comment. But luckily, we have a lot of social media reports also. We also have the Ukrainian state bodies commenting actively on the events. So we have reliable sources from the government that are covering the situation. But unfortunately, in places like Mariupol, for instance, we know that once again, a humanitarian corridor was disrupted today. People were not evacuated and the humanitarian corridor did not get into the humanitarian cargo did not get into the city. And yes, for instance, today it was reported that more than 1,500 people, civilians, were killed during the 12-day siege of Mariupol that continues. And that is just a horrible number that really we can only try to experience by looking at the photographs and videos of the carnage that the Russians are doing to this wonderful city. So, of course,
horrible reports coming out of Mariupol, indeed. What can you tell us about Kyiv? How concerned are you about the reports that Russian tanks are moving in on the capital?
Well, of course, I'm concerned about Russian tanks moving everywhere on Ukraine, but I know that even if they move onto the capital, this will not be the end of the war. Ukraine will not surrender. Ukraine will fight until the very end, and it will win this war, but we need a little bit of help to do this. So basically, we know definitely from military reports that Russia is gathering, it has still not abandoned its plan to capture the capital. It is gathering resources right now for this. But I know that also my city has a formidable defense that has been repelling these attacks for more than a week. And many Western experts, they wrote us off in the first, they said the Kyiv would fall in the first 24 hours. Well, that is definitely not happening right now. So I'm sure that their defense will put up a battle. And even if Kyiv will be lost, that will not be the end of the war.
Alia Chandra, the editor-in-chief of Euromaidan Press. Thank you so much, and please be safe.
Thank you.
We must reduce our dependence on raw materials from Russia. That was the message today from European Union leaders in Versailles, France. The EU wants to phase out its reliance on Russian oil, gas, and coal over the next 5 years. But it's not only in energy that Europe aims to become more self-sufficient. The war in Ukraine has also made food security a priority.
Ukraine and Russia are two very important markets, and the war has already destabilized the food supply market in Europe. This will be felt even more in 12 to 18 months because of the impact on Ukraine and the crops there. There will be a major disruption to food supplies in Europe and Africa. So we have to prepare to re-evaluate our food production strategy to ensure autonomy for our food and protein production. And we must reassess the strategy for Africa, because a number of African countries are going to be hit by famine in the next 12 to 18 months because of this war.
Well, together, the grain-growing regions of Russia and Ukraine are known as the world's breadbasket. They account for around 30% of the global wheat supply, 20% of corn, and 4/5 of the world's sunflower oil supply. Wheat prices have already soared from below 280 to over 360 euros a ton since the invasion began. With Russia also a major exporter of fertilizer, experts fear serious escalations in global food insecurity. We can now talk to Dr. David Laborde-Bouquet. He's a senior research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute in Washington, D.C. Welcome to the day, Mr. Laborde. These are dramatic predictions. You have worked on food security for a long time. Have you ever experienced a similar situation?
Good afternoon. And yes, unfortunately for the world, every decade, every 10 years, we have a kind of major food crisis. The current situation is particularly in the sense that we are already living a major economic crisis with the COVID-19. So this one is happening at a time where most economies are not in the best shape, to put it like this. But also, the most similar crisis in terms of magnitude was the one in 2007, 2008, while due to mainly to drought, in particular, the wheat production was pretty low, and in a kind of magnitude similar to losing Ukraine production this year. So we have been there. What I just want to say is, when it's weather, after a bad harvest, you have a good harvest. Now, with the war, things are different. We don't know what the next season will look like, and it may not bring us peace.
Maybe drawing on past experiences, what do you think can be done to soften the blow, particularly in developing countries?
So obviously, there is a kind of package of solutions that should always be there. The first one is to make sure that the world try to cooperate and that we avoid any selfish behavior from countries, that we try to limit their own export, the export of food or the export of fertilizer in particular, because low and middle-income countries will need them and may not have the purchasing power to compete just in price like other countries can do. At the same time, we also need to make sure that the sanctions that we are building around this crisis is going to protect or at least shelter the trade of food and the trade in fertilizer. It's already going on, but the sanction world has a lot of domino effects, so we have to be extra careful. Two last points. One is we need also to make sure that some of the low and middle-income countries have money to implement their own social safety net to protect part of their population that are the most vulnerable. And in the past, it has worked, but actually cost money. And with the COVID-19, a lot of countries are already missing money. And last but not least, I will say for rich economies, but also emerging economies, rethinking all the biofuel programs, because today we are burning food crops and fertilizers used for these food crops instead of prioritizing feeding people and to some extent animals that we feed people.
So a lot to be done and a long road ahead. Let's talk about a situation that's been long coming. In February, even before the war had even started, food prices had reached an all-time high, according to the UN. Now, many of the countries most vulnerable to food inflation have fairly fragile political infrastructures. How big a threat does the situation pose to peace and stability?
So prices are today extremely high, as we have said. They are the highest in nominal terms, but if you correct from inflation, we are still not at the level that we have seen in the 70s. So the world has not a worse situation than today. Really, the key issue I think that we are all to worry about is what's happened on the fertilizer market, because it really can make the situation last much longer, and therefore we will have a system-wide effect on the food price inflation. Now, just if you're in low-income countries or in advanced economies, obviously the situation is not the same. Because if you buy a piece of bread in Germany or the US, just 5% of this piece of bread is the price of wheat. When you are in lower income countries, this share can be much higher. The value chain is shorter. So, the link between commodity price and food prices are not the same everywhere.
Many are looking towards the U.S. to pick up the slack when it comes to wheat exports, especially. But there are fears that Washington will limit exports to ensure domestic supplies. What do you think will happen?
So no, I don't think that the US will limit their exports. First, even from a constitutional point of view, actually, it's not so easy to do it. They have an history of being food exporters in the Rare Revolution, so they are very careful about that. And at the same time, the US are not the player on the wheat market that they were even 20 or 30 years ago. Now we're entering in the spring season where actually you can plant some wheat crops in the northern hemisphere. Some farmers in the US are going to do it, but they are not going to basically fill the gap. Also because other crops today are also very profitable. Soybean is profitable, corn is profitable. Their prices have increased too. So the salvation of the world in terms of wheat will not come from the US, at least not from the US alone.
Dr. David Laborde, he's a senior research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute in Washington. Thanks for your time. A week ago, an agreement between Iran and an international delegation to revive the 2015 nuclear deal appeared to be within reach. But today, the EU announced a pause in the negotiations. Russia, a party to the initial agreement, is demanding that its trade with Iran not be affected by Western sanctions. One diplomat warned that Russia was threatening to take the deal hostage. Iranian lawyer and Nobel laureate Shirin Ebadi agrees. She spoke to DW's Bigot Mas about her fears that Russia is exploiting Iran.
Nobel Peace Prize laureate Shirin Ebadi has lived in exile in London for years, but her heart remains in Iran and she's in daily contact with her colleagues there. Her biggest fear is that the nuclear talks could collapse just when they seemed on the verge of a breakthrough before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I am very sorry to see that the Iranian government is not taking its own interests into account. It's blindly obeying Russia without concern for its own national interest. She's urging Tehran to agree a deal that could see the end of sanctions and thus open up potentially huge commercial opportunities. If Iran establishes relations with the West, it can export natural gas. Iran has the second richest gas reserves after Russia in the world. It is not in the interest of Russia for Iran to export its gas in the absence of the Russian market. That is why Russia does not allow Iran to reconcile with the West. Shirin Ebadi is convinced that the Iranian people see through this, and that standing by Russia is unpopular in her home country. Iran is making a big mistake. It's one of the main differences between the Iranian government and its people. It's been a bone of contention. People are saying, why are you not serving the national interest? Russia only wants the government to stay in power because they serve the interests of Russia. Shirin Ebadi dreams of an Iran that breaks free from Russian influence and moves closer to the West. But at the moment, this looks extremely unlikely.
Let's bring in Hamid Reza Azizi now. He's a visiting fellow at the Berlin-based German Institute for International and Security Affairs. Mr. Azizi, negotiations have been halted right before the finish line. Do you fear, like Shirin Ebadi, that the nuclear deal is in jeopardy?
Yeah, it seems very much so because, everybody hoped before the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, when the crisis was already looming, that the Russians, for the sake of their own non-proliferation interests, would compartmentalize the issues and won't go so far as sabotaging the nuclear talks. But that's what seems to have happened right now. So although they talk about a pause or a kind of short halt in the talks, it may happen that, if they cannot find a solution to address as they say, the external factor problem, which is obviously Russia, the whole talks may be in jeopardy. I do believe so.
So Russia is using the JCPOA as a bargaining chip in its relationship with the West, effectively holding the deal hostage. How likely are they to succeed, you think?
Well, it depends on what exact aims they are pursuing, because if the aim is just to kind of not allow the West to have a free hand to solely focus on Russia, in terms of not allowing the JCPOA as a major concern for the West to be solved, in order for them not to be able to focus on Russia, they can succeed in that. But, I think it's a very short-sighted view if this is the goal, because at the end of the day, at the level at which Iran is now enriching uranium, if they decide at some point that, there's no other option other than going for the weaponization of their nuclear program, that would be a headache for the Russians, and a huge one, actually. So that's my view on that point.
Ms. Ebadi, we just heard it in the report, accuses the government in Tehran of blindly obeying Russia, of not acting in its people's best interest. Do you agree with that?
Well, generally speaking, I would say the Iranian government is in a very complicated situation because, to some extent, it's a self-made crisis because the agreement was already in hand when Rouhani was still president, but factional politics on the Iranian side and also hesitation on the U.S. side kind of delayed the deal, and now we are facing the current situation. And, the calculation of the Iranian government is that if it happens that once again the United States withdraws from the deal, in case that the deal is already reached, if the next U.S. administration, withdraws from the deal, while Iran's relations with Russia has been also deteriorated because of circumventing it one way or another in the talks, then Iran would be in a situation without any kind of resort. So basically, I agree with that statement, but it is not just something related to the current situation. It has more to do with the general orientation of the country, which has brought us to the point that we are actually here in terms of not having other option but to be forced to take into account Russian considerations as well.
Let's talk about the broader picture. Are Russia's demands the only thing holding back a new deal?
Well, it seems that at least at the technical level, the other sides, especially Iran and the United States, were already happy with the state of the negotiation. So I do believe that the major obstacle now is the Russian demands. Of course, we've been hearing some other statements from the Iranian side, like the United States is asking new demands or things like that. But that is, I think, some way of trying to find a kind of exit way in order not to be forced to blame Russia directly if the talk collapses. So this is how I see the situation, actually.
We only have some 20 seconds left, but I don't want to leave you without asking, can there be a deal without Russia?
It's complicated, but it is possible if Iran agrees to directly talk with the United States and they can sort out a kind of bilateral agreements, sanctions removal, and Iran going back to its commitments.
Hamid Azizi, visiting fellow at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. Thank you so much for those insights. And the war in Ukraine has had an impact on all walks of life all around the world. And at the Beijing Paralympics, Ukrainian athletes didn't miss their opportunity to make another appeal for peace. Several members of Ukraine's National Committee observed a minute of silence, calling for an end to the war. Despite Russia's invasion of their homeland, the Ukrainian team has thrived in the Paralympics. They've claimed 6 gold medals, putting them third in the table behind China and Canada. That was The Day. As always, the conversation continues online. You'll find us on Twitter at DW News. From myself and the entire team at The Day, thanks for spending this part of your day with us.
Off the money. Russian oligarchs, many of whom hold close ties to Vladimir Putin, have long parked their ill-gotten funds outside their own country. Now Russia's war in Ukraine has governments rethink their lax rules on foreign investment. Why sanctions from the financial sector might be the strongest weapon in the fight against the Russian regime. A business special.
Next on DW. To the point. Strong opinions, clear positions, international perspectives.
The West has fired off one salvo of economic sanctions after another in an effort to stop Putin's war on Ukraine.